joining the European Union, we're a little bit lost. We don't know who we are. And then again, there was this folk revival. Finnish dialects, there was a dialect boom. And for example, heavy metal, we started using Kalevala themes, even dialect texts, adapting Kalevala to folk heavy metal, and it keeps being a source of inspiration.
What's been the broader impact of this poem around the world, one might say, starting with you, Tom?
Well, the Kalevala is a great example of the way in which a nation can find itself and can share itself with the rest of the world. And I think picking up a little bit on what Daniel has said about translations, you can look at cultural activists in various parts of the world taking the effort to translate the Kalevala into their own languages, and in that way to celebrate their own traditions and their own culture through this act of translating this wonderful piece of world literature into that language. So we have, of course, translations in English and French and German and the Nordic languages, but we also have translations in Komi, in Udmurt, in Beps, and the form of Finnish that's spoken in northern Sweden, Meänkieli, and into modern Karelian. And we have versions in Yiddish, and Esperanto, and Chinese, and Turkish, and Persian, and Tamil, and Catalan. It's just endless. Every year there's a new translation into a new language of the world, which is reflective of this significance of expressing your culture through an epic.
Do you want to come in?
Yes, not much to say. I'm not a big fan of translation of poetry. I think it can't really happen. But nevertheless, people do it. The poets do it all the time. And I agree with Tom, it is largely a success in the sense that it gets people interested. They're thinking more about their own language now. So recently there was not too long ago, a translation of Kalevala into modern Greek that got modern Greeks thinking about modern Greek again. Wait, look, we can do this with our language too. It forces a good writer, a good translator, it forces them to use their language in slightly different ways, which is a good thing. Exercising the muscles of your language in a new, unseen way can be very good for you. So that's an important aspect to keep in mind. And in a way, the Finns are at a slight disadvantage in that they have the original, but they have tried translating it into modern Finnish so that more Finns will be able to read it easily. And as Tom mentioned, there's the Meänkieli, there's also a Savo dialect, different Finnish dialects. So it's inspiring many people on many different layers and levels. I think that's the complexity of Kalevala, why it's so rich.
Richard, do you want to come in now?
Yes, I like to talk from a Finnish perspective rather than a global perspective, because how is Kalevala visible in Finland now? What does it mean to people now? And for example, it's in different names. So people are called Ilmari, they're called Väinö, these are names, popular names. Also Elias, which is Elias Lambros's first name, is a very popular name for boys. Also we have, I don't know, insurance companies called Sampo and Ilmarinen. These names, they're powerful and reliable, let's say. I read an MA dissertation where they discussed, they interviewed Finns and asked them, what does it mean to you? And some people said, oh, I identify with Louhi, I'm like a witch. So that these characters, these archetypal characters that they identify with. Whereas others are more critical and say, oh, there's no one there, women aren't in central role. Some of them say, it's like the Bible, it's stories. So it's as important as the Bible, it seems, for some Finns. Some see it being an essential part of Finnish culture and identity because of its language and what Tom mentioned earlier, this quirkiness, this creativity, problem solving, it's all connected to the Kalevala. I also asked some of my friends and my family, what does it mean to you in preparation for this? And some said, oh, I don't know. It doesn't really mean anything. It's I'm not that sophisticated, I'm not that cultured. So as if it was high culture for them. So it's gone from like folk culture to high culture and partly remained there. We all do learn in the school, we do hear about. So everyone's familiar with these characters. I'm not saying that, but it didn't necessarily mean anything to them active in their everyday lives. And an interesting other point is I asked my sister who's doing a master's in design at our university in Helsinki. I said, what do you do the art students think about it now? What design students? Do you talk about the Kalevala? She said, oh, we're very careful. I said, what do you mean? How are we careful about the Kalevala? Because there's this thought that maybe it isn't entirely finished, because it is also Karelian. And they're very careful not to sort of colonize this tradition, and they're very careful in using it.
What would your final statement about this book?
Well, it is this great boundary difficult because although there are similarities and parallels between the culture, the Russian culture, the Slavonic culture, and the Swedish culture, the actual words, the actual rhythms, the use of parallelism, the use of synonyms, all kinds of poetic devices that we haven't had time to go into, they'll only work in Finnish. There's no getting away from that.
Is that unusual that those devices you're talking about will only work in one language, can't be transferred to other languages?
Think of it this way: Beowulf is full of synonyms. There are something like 50 or 60 words for ship, partly because they needed to alliterate, but also partly because the culture at that time, the aesthetic, the poetics, treasured the idea of saying the same thing in a different way. Of course, you can't really say the same thing a different way. If you use different words, you're slightly saying something different. And that's part of the richness of Beowulf. Finnish does the same thing, and Kalevala they're doing that, but of course none of the words match. So what they have synonyms for in Kalevala is not going to be what they're going to be synonyms for in Beowulf, or for that matter in modern English. So that goes back to the translation problem again. The words that alliterate in Finnish, I can translate them sort of into English, but they won't alliterate in English.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to Rita Malahobi, Tom Dubois, and Daniel Avondolo, and to our studio engineer, Douglas MacDonald. Next week, Nikola Tesla, the Serbian-American inventor, and his impact at the dawn of the electrical age. Thanks for listening.
In Our Time with Melvyn Bragg is produced by Simon Tillotson. Welcome to Cafe Hope, where the conversation is always uplifting.
So, okay, what needs doing? Okay, there's some rubbish here. I guess I'll start clearing that up.
I really appreciate all the hard work that you and the team have done.
My product is not like it's a bloke that doesn't go back to prison. Its purpose is to break the cycle of reoffending.
It's been a good support network for me, so it really helped me.
A brand new series meeting the people transforming the lives of those around them.
The main thing in it all is getting out and getting the mixing and what that does for your well-being, for your mental health. It's really, really changed my life.
Cafe Hope with me, Rachel Burden, starts on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds next Monday morning at 9:45. Now it's New Storytellers, the series which introduces new feature-making talent to the BBC. Originally broadcast in 2022, the programmes are made by students for the annual Charles Parker Prize. Today, Charles' daughter, Sarah Parker, introduces the judging panel's highly commended 2022 entry, Sarah Spirit.
On June 3rd, 2017, Sarah Selenak died in the London Bridge Borough Market terror attack. This programme, Sarah's Spirit, tells the story of this young woman from Brisbane, Australia. She was a close friend of Anna Budd, an MA student at Goldsmiths College, University of London, who made this audio feature in her memory. 5 years after the attack, Sarah's parents, Mark, and her mum, Julie, are keeping her memory alive.
Check with me. In the hand, like she was freezing cold because she's in the morgue, so she was cold, but her hand was warm, and basically she was just waiting to say goodbye. The spirit stayed with her until we got there, and from that day on she has been with me by my side every single day. Sarah is my second born. She had an older brother, Scott, and a younger brother, Harrison.
She was sort of that fun kid that was always busy.
She had these busy fingers, her hands were always going.
I guess for me, as her dad, her working with me in a construction industry was just, for me, was so great. She was so beautiful on a job site, but she was there doing like a real man's job, like crane operator. So she would come to work in a high-vis uniform. She had, the blonde hair and the red painted nails.
She was a miniature version of myself in a lot of ways. She never did anything crazy. I mean, of course she went out and had fun, but I always knew that she would be looking out for others. She had that common sense factor about her, and
and I always thought she'd be fine.
In her comfort zone with her friends, like she was the life of the party. She was like really out there.
And then when she went to London, there was a video of her with this little Italian man in this restaurant dancing. He grabs her and does this dance, and then she spreads her legs over and does this big dip thing. And it was just a bit silly. I'm thinking, oh my God, I'd do that. And she really came out of her shell. Like, that was it. She wanted to spread her wings and fly. She was my best friend. Yeah.
So Sarah's had this vision of travelling overseas and working. Her initial plan was Italy, in Milan, and being a different language and, you know, a place that she'd never been to, we were sort of a little bit sceptical. She was all ready to travel, but she didn't have a job to go to. So it was a bit of a frantic consideration to go and find a job, which she did, but the job was in London.
Actually, in a strange way, I was really happy that she decided to go to London. I thought she'd be safer.
She made her way around. She was very comfortable in being there. She loved the fashion. She loved the history of London, and she was really having the time of her life.
It's Saturday night in London. She got the night off. So she contacted her friend Cree, and they were looking for a classy rooftop bar to go to. So I always wanted to go somewhere classy, get dressed up, get the heels on and the makeup and the hair and all that. And they couldn't find it. So in the end, they ended up going right next to Borough Marcus because they wanted to be somewhere close to meet another friend who she was meeting. Unbeknown to Sarzy and Cree, they walked out into a terror attack, the London terror attack. And it was just sheer panic. Police shot 56 shots. They had knives strapped to their wrists, basically stabbing as many people as they could along the way. And Sarah was bending down helping someone else in the attack, and she was stabbed from behind, multiple stab wounds from behind, and was taken on the steps at Borough Market right near the church.
It's a Saturday night in London, Sunday morning here in Australia. We had a phone call from a friend who said, have you heard that there's a terror attack?
And I said, oh no. And then she said, oh, have you heard from Sarah? I said, well, no, because it's the wrong time of day. I don't hear from her. So I wasn't alarmed. She was reliable.
We just dismissed it. Okay, that's something that happens overseas. It's on TV, but it doesn't really relate to us. We were very confident that Sarah's very streetwise, she's athletic, she's, a sensible person, and she would not get involved in something like that.
Then I got a call that Sunday night around dinner time to say that Sarah hadn't come home from her night out. And that wasn't like Sarah. Sarah wasn't one to do the wrong thing. And then everything started to happen.
Australian Sarah Zelenak. Sarah Zelenak.
There are great concerns for a Brisbane woman who's been missing in London since the terror attack. It's believed Sarah Zelenak was separated from her friends in the chaos.
I kept calling her, no response, kept ringing. Everyone in the whole world called but Sarah. We had 9 different news and police and all different radio, Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10, Channel 2, New York Times on our front doorstep. We had people everywhere, and we had radio stations wanting to do interviews, and because it was the biggest case in the world at that time.
So we were never ever thinking, the worst. We were thinking that potentially she's in the hospital as one of the unnamed victims that are undisclosed. Maybe she's in hiding, where is she, what's she doing, and waiting for her phone call.
when you have a toddler and you're in the supermarket and you lose them for that second, that fear and that sheer panic that you feel, I had for 3 days.
The hardest thing I've ever had to do in my whole life is to say to Harrison that you need to come to London. And he's like, "Oh, Dad, I don't want to do that. You know, I don't need to go." And for me to say to him, "I think that your sister's dead and you need to travel," like, it just broke my heart. It was just so horrific to even think about that.
Harrison and Mark and I decided to fly. We were about to touch down.
So we're about 1,000 feet from landing, where you start getting Wi-Fi and reception, and Julie's phone rang. And it was our oldest son, Scott.
Scott said, "Mum, the DNA results have proven that Sarah is dead." And I thought, "Oh my freaking God, you've got to be joking." And I honestly thought I was going to have a heart attack. I was having a heart attack.
Jules is up out of her seat.
I actually couldn't breathe.
We've got air hostess as we're landing.
I just screamed like I was being burnt with
all those sorts of things.
And I was just like shaking like I'd been in an ice cold river. I was just in absolute shock. The whole world found out before us.
In the breaking news, a second Australian has just been confirmed killed in the London Bridge attacks.
Once we're received into the UK, then, you know, we're taken to a hotel and we just sit down in total disbelief.
We had to wait 4 days to view her body.
Someone's told you that your daughter's dead, but you don't believe it. Like, you're still thinking that there's, you know, they've got it wrong. There's, you know, 1% hope that, you know, they've got it wrong.
They were basically had to make her okay to look well enough for us to see. Then we finally got to view her body, and it was definitely Sarah.
Sarah's body being in the morgue was cold. You know, it's definitely her. You know it's her. You can see all her physical features.
I checked all her fingers and toes, her freckles, her earrings. I told her how proud I was of her and how much I loved her.
You know that, you know, it's her, but you're in such disbelief that you've got no understanding of how all this, you know, is so true. For me, I was in a space for the first 3 months where I couldn't get out of bed. You know, why would you get out of bed, and why, you know, there was no real purpose in life.
I went back to work as quickly as I possibly could because I couldn't go to that dark place and deal with that. The pain of losing my daughter being stabbed to death in London in a terror attack. It was unfathomable. The doctors wanted to put me straight on antidepressants, and I'm not that type of person. So I've done a lot of work as far as my healing. I've done kinesiology, Reiki, mindfulness, meditation.
You know, we started to build our not-for-profit organisation to help support other people, and that gave, I think more importantly to me at that stage, gave me some strong purpose to have a cause and to do something and to help others. So opening that conversation to society to say, well, let's talk about grief, educate people on how to support someone in grief, and normalise the process. Grief can be very self-isolating. You withdraw and you don't want to be social, you don't want to be around friends because, you know, you feel like you're the odd one out.
I wasn't a spiritual person at all before, and nor did I have a reason to be, but now I'm a really spiritual person. I'm like the conduit between heaven and earth. That's the only way to describe it. I know and am being guided by Sarah every single day. When you lose your child in such traumatic circumstances, a part of you dies with your child. And I will always have a huge hole in my heart. That will never go away. So you have to heal around the hole, but the hole's still there. And I've changed. Grief has changed me. And I can never be the person I used to be. And I can never be that person I was before because I'm broken forever.
Sarah's Spirit was produced by Anna Budd, a student at Goldsmiths College, University of London. It was highly commended in the 2020 Charles Barker Prize, dedicated to the memory of my dad. And in the next episode of New Storytellers, we'll be hearing the Gold Award-winning feature, The Sound Collector, by Talia Augustidis of University College London. New Storytellers is a soundscape production for BBC Radio 4.
Sarah Parker, the final New Storytellers in this series, is at the same time tomorrow. And just a quick reminder that from Monday, our book of the week will be in its shiny new weekday morning slot of 11:45. If you listen at midnight, there's no change. The new later book slot kicks off with a personal memoir of a former Carmelite nun, Catherine Coldstream's Cloistered, 11:45 next Monday.
On BBC iPlayer.
66 million years ago, an asteroid was on a direct collision course with the Earth. Out of the darkness that followed, emerged a group that went on to dominate the world.
Mammals with David Attenborough.
In this series, we'll reveal the secrets behind their success.
This is very wild. Wow!
And the challenges they now face in a world dominated by the most successful mammal of all. Us.
Look at that! Mammals begins on Sunday on BBC iPlayer.
BBC News at 10 o'clock. The UK's largest water company, Thames Water, has said the first part of a multi-billion-pound investment is being withheld because regulations have hampered its turnaround plans. Shareholders are refusing to inject more cash into the company without substantial bill increases for the firm's 15 million customers. Thames Water is £18 billion in debt, and there have been calls for it to be renationalised. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, said the government was monitoring the situation.
Our understanding is that the company is still solvent, and today's news should not have an impact on the services received by customers. Obviously, there are parts of the country where the service has not been up to scratch, including in my own constituency, and local MPs will continue to hold Thames Water to account.
Official figures have confirmed that the economy slipped into a mild recession in the second half of last year. The Chancellor said 2023 had been tough, but the government's plan was working. Labour said Rishi Sunak had broken his promise to grow the economy, while the Lib Dems said the figures showed the economic damage that had been done by the government. Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner has told the Today programme she won't publish her personal tax details unless Conservative MPs do the same. Greater Manchester Police says it's re-examining its decision not to investigate allegations she gave false information when selling a house, whereas Rayner has again insisted she's done nothing wrong. The bodies of 2 construction workers who've been missing since a bridge collapsed in the US city of Baltimore on Tuesday have been found in the water. The search for 4 other workers has been called off as conditions are said to be too dangerous for divers. A teaching union says its members are reporting a significant rise in levels of violence and abuse from pupils since the pandemic. Nearly 1 in 5 teachers in England who took part in a survey for the BBC said they had been hit by a student since the start of the year. BBC News.
What influences how we trust and why? The stuff that makes it okay for us to get into that Uber or buy something online from someone we've never met. At 1:45 this afternoon, the Trust Shift has some interesting answers and insights into the changes recently in how our trust is earned and given. Now then, it's time for Woman's Hour with Nuala McGovern.
It is indeed. Hello and welcome to Women's Hour. Well, we will begin today by looking at a survey commissioned by the BBC that says nearly 1 in 5 teachers in England has been hit by a pupil this year. It's a very stark statistic. And if that has been your experience as a teacher, I'd like to hear from you this morning. You can text the programme, the number is 84844. On social media, we're at BBC Women's Hour, or you can email us through our website. If you'd like to send a WhatsApp message or a voice note, that number is 03700 100 444. And schools also come up in our next instalment of the series, Breaking the Cycle. We've been hearing about a project that works to help young people at risk. Today, a teenage boy tells us his story of getting caught up in dealing drugs with an honesty that may stop you in your tracks. So that is coming up. Also, we'll have the Australian MP, Georgie Purcell. She's going to join us from Melbourne. There was a photo of her that was digitally altered to give her bigger breasts, and the conversations about that really underscored some of the challenges facing women in politics. So we'll have a conversation with Miss Purcell. And I'd also today like your memories of the British fashion brand Biba. It's celebrating its 60th anniversary. I have the founder, Barbara Hula-Nicky, to bring us back to its heyday in London. Were you wide-eyed when you came to London and saw the Biba Superstore? Well, you can text us 84844 for that. And speaking of birthdays, 5 Live turns 30 years old today. It was often thought of as a station for men, but Eleanor Oldroyd was there from day one, and she will be here in the Women's Hour studio. I'm very much looking forward to speaking to her. But do let us begin with more information on that survey about what's really going on in classrooms around England. The BBC commissioned this survey of 9,000 teachers. It found, as I mentioned, nearly 1 in 5 teachers in England has been hit by a pupil. Now, the findings were gathered between February and March this year. They include 15% of secondary school teachers who said they experienced sexual harassment from a pupil when working at a school. We do know that the teacher workforce is predominantly female. 76% of teachers are women. The Department for Education, they have responded in part saying they've invested £10 million in behaviour hubs to support schools. I want to speak to Dr. Patrick Roach, General Secretary of the Teachers Union, NASUWT. They represent 300,000 members across at least 25,000 schools in the UK. You're very welcome, Doctor. Your reaction this morning to that survey?
Well, thanks very much for inviting me in. And, your survey echoes what our members are also telling us. We've also surveyed our members, and actually this weekend our annual conference opens, where behaviour is one of the top issues for debate, top issue for debate amongst our members, because the reality out there in schools and in classrooms is one in which teachers are routinely subject to verbal abuse, verbal forms of violence, but also physical abuse and violence. That's ranging from back-chatting classrooms to being sworn at, to being spat at, punched, kicked, shoved, or indeed headbutted. We had to take action, legal action, on behalf of one of our members who'd been headbutted, seriously injured, to the point that he could no longer continue teaching, and in order to get a compensation settlement for that member. Frankly, the situation has become a crisis in our schools, which the government needs to do more to address.
And I'll come to what the government says in just a moment, but staying with this point of in the classroom, what do you or your members believe are the factors that are contributing to this increase, as you also call it, of violence?
Well, we've certainly seen, and I think your survey also echoes what our survey was saying, that there's been a significant increase in violent and disruptive behaviour in classrooms since the end of the pandemic. So, you know, whether that is a pandemic effect, I think it requires others to comment on. We are seeing certainly an increase in children presenting with mental health difficulties since the pandemic, and a lack of support, access to support for those pupils. In fact, only in the last few weeks, the Children's Commissioner for England has also been raising concerns about the absence of effective and timely support for children who are presenting with mental health difficulties. But the realities are pre-pandemic as well as post-pandemic. We're seeing an increase in class sizes, largely driven by underfunding in schools. That actually, if you can't afford to recruit more teachers or more support staff, then class sizes increase, which makes life increasingly difficult for...
I'm sure if those classrooms are difficult to begin with or violent in some cases, a larger class size would of course increase those difficulties, but a large class size shouldn't inherently mean behaviour that is very difficult to manage. And I want to just read a part of the statement that the Department for Education gave to Women's Hour. They said, no teacher should be workplace. We're taking decisive action to improve pupil behaviour, so all schools are calm, safe and supportive environments where pupils and staff can work in safety and are respected. Our £10 million Behaviour Hubs programme aims to support up to 700 schools over 3 years to improve behaviour. What do you think of that statement, and also the, I suppose, effectiveness of a behaviour hub?
Well, we're you know, very interested in the Behaviour Hubs programme. But the reality is we have a system-wide problem affecting as many as 20,000 schools across the country. The government talks about £10 million, it talks about 700 schools. The realities are that we need to scale that up significantly more than the government's ambitions currently support. The realities are that, as your survey shows and the NSWT's own research shows, is that we have a system-wide problem, if not a crisis. We need to see greater scaling up from government in order to address the nature of the crisis that we see in our schools. Now that will mean not only support and extra resources for schools themselves, but extra support and resourcing for agencies that are working to support schools and to support children and families, because those agencies, we have seen devastating cuts over the course of the last decade, and that isn't helping to resolve the issues that teachers are facing.
Let me read a couple of the comments that are coming in. One is from a nursery teacher. She says, she's anonymous, she says she's been a nursery teacher for over 20 years. The level of complex needs coming into schools this year is nothing I've ever seen. I've never had a class with such needs as I have this year. 15 out of 25 started school in nappies, aged 3. 5 really complex children, non-verbal, unable to feed themselves or communicate on entry in September. I was bitten badly this year. I found it upsetting, and actually upset my own children at home. Because I love my job, staying anonymous, because I love my job and the teacher I work with and my school. Of course, that's a nursery teacher, so really at the very beginning. Another comment coming in: belligerent, aggressive parents, ill-mannered children routinely leaving class because they don't want to be there. This on top of continual low-level disruption, no redress with the parents, signs everywhere saying violence will not be tolerated. Instead, teachers tolerate it every day. But I suppose if we're seeing the violence manifest in that way, and you can point fingers at the parents or at the children that are there, but there must be something more systemic going on underneath.
Yeah, there has to be something more systemic going on underneath, because it's not one or two isolated incidents within our schools. And, you know, those stories that you know, your listeners have relayed to you are the stories that we hear every single day from our members the length and breadth of the country. Something is going on, and that something needs to be tackled at a national level with national intervention.
We're going to leave it there, Dr. Patrick Roche. I do want to let our listeners know that we have another instalment coming up of our series Breaking the Cycle, and there we hear about where the school was really the safety net for this young boy, really a teenager, who was going off the rails. So we will hear that a little bit later coming up on Women's Hour. Dr. Patrick Roche, thank you very much. But next, we want to turn to a little reminiscing. This is of the glory days of a brand that revolutionised British fashion. It is 60 years since the first Biba shop opened in Abington Road in Kensington in London, and marking that there is an exhibition at the Fashion and Textile Museum in London. It's called The Biba Story. It's from 1964 to 1975. Because in just over a decade, Biba went from a mail order business to a 7-story department store with everything you could possibly want in it. It was created by Barbara Holonicki, along with her husband, who was known as Fitz. His name was Stephen Fitzsimons. And not only did Biba transform how women access fashion, the experience of trying on the clothes was quite unusual, to the cost. And it was also very much a company run by women for women. It even had a creche in one of the shops, can you imagine? Barbara and the curator of the current exhibition, Martin Pell, joined me a little earlier this week to discuss how really this fashion phenomenon blossomed to become one of the world's first lifestyle labels. I began with Barbara asking her what she remembers about those early days.
It was very tough.
Yeah?
It was very tough to be thrown right into the production of clothes. But Fitz and I did it together, and we certainly learned very quickly by all the mistakes we made.
What do you think was the biggest challenge in those times? Because things, when I read about Biba, it looks like things happened very fast.
Absolutely. Within weeks, you know, I mean, literally every day he went to collect the mail, which was in Oxford Street, which was sad.